and you'll get a little notification saying, that you approve the recording and you wish to stay with the group. Okay, so today we are looking at assessment 3. I want you, because I had my class this morning and I know I had a room of very stressed out students. The assessment does look very, very complex. One of the things I want you to do is not to overthink it. And what I really aim to try and do today is look at how we can simplify it and keep it in context, so that you've got a clear idea of what you need to do. And we've got to remember, it is only a 5-minute presentation in total. So if you start overthinking it, it's going to be really hard for you to do it to the 5 minutes. I am going to give you guidelines on how much time you should spend on the different parts so that you've got a little bit of an idea. And I'll give you a little bit of a hint on the way you can incorporate some of the elements that you do need to include in the recording that you do. Okay, so what is our assessment? This is what we call a roadshow leadership speech. Now, what I want you to think about when you consider this kind of presentation, basically it means that you would be, if we were doing this face-to-face, you would be doing it with your fellow leaders. You wouldn't be doing it on your own. So where we've given you 5 minutes, we've got 8 in the leadership team. That means that we would end up with 5 lots of 8 as a whole. So it's a little bit like a jigsaw. You've got 5 minutes to present the concepts and the bits that relate to what are of concern to you, the department that you're in charge of, and then the others are going to fill the gap. So what will happen is it all comes together. So that's what we mean by a roadshow. And that's a little bit why it does look a little bit complicated and a little bit complex. It's because you're merging what you see together as an end result. So technically, with your recordings, I could go, this person's done this person's done this person, I would work it all out and I could put them all together and I would have the full roadshow in front of me covering every single department within the organisation. So think of yourself as that one little piece of the jigsaw in the bigger picture when it comes to this. And that's why you've got 5 minutes as part of this presentation. What I do want you to think about, because it does say plus or minus 10%, that doesn't give a lot of leeway at all. No more than 6 minutes. So 5, maximum 6 minutes. In total, it's worth 40%, and it is due in week 13. You will submit it through Cultura in the portal. So you'll go into the system and you will submit it that way. So we do have, again, our generative AI traffic lights to consider, and this one has been ticked off as a level 2. So that means that if you want to generate some ideas, use something like ChatGPT and get some ideas together, you can do that, but you need to make sure that after you have done your reference list at the very end, that you've included your references to AI and what questions you asked it and what responses that you got back. So that means we've got the evidence of what you've included. You are not going to use AI as a complete tool to write the assessment. That's not going to work for you because you really there's a fair amount of thinking that you need to do here that AI is not going to be able to do for you. Personally, for this one, because of the framework and the way that you can work through this, I would suggest you don't even think about it. Just work on your initiative and follow the guidelines that I'm about to give you, as I think you will get a better result doing this and following the concepts that you're considering. So it is a speech. So that means that we do, similar to what we're doing now, I do want to see you on the screen making the discussions. We have got it that you can use a slide deck. So the slide deck means that you've got that opportunity of being able to include any references, so supporting what you're saying. And it also means that you can structure things and include visual tools. And you will see that in a minute when I get to talking about part of one of the ways that you can pull it together. You can use visual tools to be able to help explain the points that you want to make. So keeping in mind, 5 minutes is not a lot of time. A visual tool on a slide deck may save you 2 minutes of talking. So keep in mind that going to the effort of including a slide deck with it is probably a really good way to go, and I would encourage you to do that. That would mean that if you use the slide deck, there's a case study analysis worksheet that is incorporated into the case study, and in the assessment outline, it says you need to submit that separately. If you use a slide deck, you can include the information you find on your case study analysis within the slide deck. So don't just copy what's on that list. Make sure that you've added a couple of dot points to it as part of what you do. Now, I'm happy for you to do that in a number of ways. If you want to incorporate it as part of your introduction, and you'll see why very shortly, you can. If you want to attach it with extra detail as part of your appendices at the end of your presentation, your end of your slides, you can also do that. You need to make sure that if you do that, that you go through every slide until you get to the end so that we can see them. It means that if we want to look more closely at your analysis, we can pause it and have a look because you've demonstrated it. You've given it there as part of everything you've presented. Make sure you utilize all your learnings from weeks 8 to 12. Okay, so this is not the same as the last assessment. This is not the same assessment as the last one, even though there might be similarities and even though we're extending on the same case study. So you need to make sure that you utilize the weeks that we're looking at. So we are now looking at the content from weeks 8 to 12. Now, Stephanie's just asked, so if we use the slides, shouldn't we put the analysis in separately? I'm going to leave that up to you. I am going to ensure, because I'm not sure whether we can do double submission through Cultura. So I'm actually going to make sure that we approach LMS to have a separate spot for you to put the analysis in. But if you want to include it in your slides rather than submitting it separately, I'm okay with that. Adrian and I have discussed this and we went, that's quite fine. We can do that. So Stephanie, totally what you feel comfortable with. If you feel that the amount of information that you've discussed in your analysis is too great to solely include into the slide deck and you want to submit it separately, go for it. That's fine. If you don't, you're not going to be penalised for it. Okay, so we're going to be able to still see what ideas you've come up with and the things that you've thought about. So you need to make sure that on your slides you include referencing, and in your worksheet, if you're not doing the slides especially, in your worksheet you definitely need to make sure you've included referencing, because that's the only visual point that we can see where you've taken your research, what you've done to look at your research and pull your information from. Okay, so is there any questions at all in regards to just this introductory part of using the slides, what weeks to look at, and referencing? Right, so Stephanie did pop a couple in there into chat. Okay, well, we'll keep moving. So the case study itself is an extension from assessment 2, but you're not repeating what you did in assessment 2, okay? So if we think about assessment 2 was aimed at the department that was identified as Design and Development Engineering Department, and the assessment 2, you had to come up with some recommendations on how to resolve some of the issues that were in that department. Only in that department, not in the others across the board. So it was something that was basically a situation that was happening within one department of all the 8 alone. So make sure that you remember this is not repeating what you've done there. The other departments may not necessarily have the same ethical issues, the same quality management issues. They may not necessarily have the same communication decision issues that were identified in assessment 2. So you're sort of really thinking that Your assessment 2's been done. You've made recommendations, and your recommendations have been put into place for the design and development engineering department. That has been successful, and we're now looking at what we do from here. Because of the whole incident itself, Aeroplug now has to, and so do the other organisations, now has to think about its image and its brand. And it has to now realign trust and develop connections back with not just employees, but prospective other companies that might do business with them, and customers that are using products that are as a result of their end item that they make as a result of it. So to start this process, we recommend you review the Aeroplug organisational structure. And as part of that, you will need to map the structure. So I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck here, because what I want to do is I just want to take you to where the case study is and look at where you can share that information from the case study. So give me a moment and I will. So for any of you that have not come across the case study yet, you may have found what we do is, we put anything like this into the announcements, and then from the announcements, you should get an email. Now, if something has happened and that email's gone to spam, or you've got a different email in the system, so you're not getting our announcement emails, there's a number of different reasons that it can happen. What you will do is you will click on announcements, and when you go to the announcement page, I start it. So the one that's got the little blue star, right? Assessment 3 case study, additional important information. And when you click on that, I've given you a number of bits of information reminding people about the webinar today. And then there's right down here is a PDF document that aligns itself to the case study. So what does that document tell us? I have taken some of the information from the original case study. So the important bits, so you can actually put case study 2 aside, because I've taken the important bits and I've included them in the case study 3 document that we've got here. And you should now be familiar with everything that's about Aeroplug and the challenge and the incident, so that it's like you are part of the organisation, you know what's going on, you know what's happening. So now what we want to look at is, where do we go to from here? What are we doing? So I've included elements from the original that gives you a breakdown on the key things that you need to pull from that first case study that we did in assessment 2. So there's going to be little things. It's existed for 30 years, so it's got a good amount of age to it. There are over 1,500 employees. That's a little bit a challenge that we'll need to think of. And it's structured along functional lines, right? So we want to sort of see that we've got here, right? That's the number of employees, and we've got functional lines. So what does that mean? It means that the structure is based on the different functions or the different departments. And it also means that there's an accountability, responsibility, reporting structure that's in place. That's what you've got to think about. So we've got basically 8 departments: the design and development engineering department, the manufacturing technicians and technical offers, installation technicians, quality assurance, contracts and administration, projects and project management. Then we've also got things like the finance and accounts department, as well as HR and culture. So each of these departments is headed by a senior manager, and that person is you. You choose which department you want to be in. Now, with my class, one of the things I suggested is I've got a couple of people in the class that come from different backgrounds. Like someone in the class comes from a finance background. Others have come from more of a HR background. Some have come from areas where they've worked in project management. So I've suggested, put yourself in a position that potentially, one, you're familiar with. So if you've got a finance and accounting background or an accounting background, put yourself into that I'm part of the finance and accounts, and that would be the department that you would select as your head. If, let's say, you're doing project management, you might look at the project management as the department. If you are doing something that's completely different as your specialisation, or you don't have a specialisation at all, you might look at the different things that you could consider. My background is as a compliance manager. So I would, if I was doing this, would choose the quality assurance department, because I know all about running and managing a compliance management department within an organisation, and how it fits and what it looks like. Okay, so make sure that you think about that. We're going to explore that structure. So the structure is coming from the information that's here in the case study. One of the things that you need to think about, because part of what you will be looking at is the key points that we need to consider. It's reinforcing what I've already said to you, that the assessment 2 information, that's all been dealt with. And we've identified that the board of directors has now requested a synergised implementation of strategies across all the departments. So they say that the key goals are, they want to make sure that we've got consistency across all departments in regards to organisational culture. We want to make sure that the ethical standards are definitely meeting the benchmark that has been set. They're looking at continuous quality management. Decision-making and efficiency in communication are also really important, not just within the departments, but between all the departments. So that gives you a little bit of a think tank of where you're starting from in relation to the goals that you might want to consider and that have been set. I'm not going to go through all of it. I am going to stop at this bit here. So this is your guideline for your case analysis worksheet, right? So what you're doing in your case analysis, the questions you're asked that you need to think about. The first one is to illustrate the structure of the organisation. Now, this is one of the reasons why I've suggested, if you want to incorporate this analysis into your presentation, this is okay. Because if you have a slide deck and you have a slide that has the structure of the organisation mapped out on that slide, that's going to save you a lot of talking time. That's going to give you the opportunity of being able to go, this is what my organisation looks like, and I will show you why in a few minutes when we go back to the slides. It also identifies and this is taken, like your analysis here is aligned to what you're being marked on. So what's in the marking rubric, if you follow what's here, you're going to be hitting the first part of the marking rubric in total, and you'll be able to make sure that you've covered everything. So a description of the leadership roles and responsibilities. So there's an implication that you're going to have an understanding of all 8. I hear you saying to me, but we only have 5 minutes. How are we going to talk about everything we need to talk about when we've got to discuss 8 different roles? I will show you how to do that. But the one that you do need to think about is the role that you take on board yourself. You are not allowed to take on board the design and development engineering department, because they've already had a major change based on your assessment 2 recommendations, right? We've got it that the CEO is now looking for a new person to replace who was in that role because he sacked that person, Aaron, and that is a completely different scenario. You are from one of the other departments. So we do not want to see anyone from the design and development engineering department. So you need to be able to explain what your role is, and also some of the KPIs. How would your output be measured as part of this? Outline and summarise the overall goals. So we've looked at some of the information that you're going to pull on to start with. Now, when I did class today, because today's was about organisational structure, there's no pretty pictures of a structure in there. We haven't talked about that. But we've talked about a lot of the things in this week's information that helps us think about more than the goals that have been outlined in the case study. So look at the theory and connect with the theory that's in this week's information, because that's going to help you think about what are the real goals? You know, like we've got these goals that are set out in the case study, and you know, we'll explore how do we find out what the real goals are? What is it that we really need to be thinking about and connecting it back? So we did a lot of connecting back in class today in relation to the case study, because there was a lot of elements that we talked about in the concepts that are in this week's slides that help you put those ideas together, and they can support you. Stephanie, I'm going to show you in a minute, okay? I just wanted to make sure. So Stephanie's asked about illustrate the structure. Okay, I will show you in a minute. I just wanted to make sure that you knew what was in the case study and what to look for. So you need to make sure that you're really familiar with this case study, and that you've addressed those 6 different points, and that becomes your analysis worksheet. So I haven't created a worksheet that I've said fill this in. I've given you the points that you need to analyse to actually create your own case study analysis worksheet. Okay, so and if you want to incorporate that into your presentation in your slide deck, we're fine with that being part of what you will do. So now I will go back to the slides so that we can actually have a look at what we mean by, oops, wait a second, it'd help if I shared, wouldn't it? Okay, so we're back to the slide deck. So if we extend on what we've just looked at, we've looked at the case study. We've identified that it's an extension of assessment 2. And I've started to get you to think about how the departments are identified in the case study, and you now need to map that structure. So what I've done is I've basically got, in a really simple term, this is a structural framework outline. This is the sort of thing that you could be looking at. So we've got our CEO at the top, right? So you would probably include the board of directors above the CEO. You would include the company name and things like that. I've left all the spaces blank, right? But what you would then do is you would think about how the company is structured. How does the structure from HR, finance, quality assurance, those sorts of areas, how are they going to fit in? And it might not necessarily be a flat linear structure that you see here. It could be something that's quite different to this. But what you're basically looking at is what might align, what might fit together. Now, my guys in class had a little bit of a discussion and a play with this as a concept. And one of the things that they came up with was they identified that some of the departments actually fitted quite nicely together. So you might end up with, let's say, something like the project management department. So we might say, oh, let's put project management department here. And under the project management department, you might end up with quality assurance, design and development engineering, contracts and administration could potentially. So you might see relationships, and that's how you would put this together. When I was in a role as a compliance manager, one of the things that we really struggled with was I was in an equivalent role to the quality assurance role or department that we've got in our case study. And in that role, I had the power to make sure that compliance was being met, that systems and processes were being followed, to develop and streamline systems and processes, but I did not have the power to hire and fire people. So when you look at a structure like this, this is where is the power to hire and fire, and how does that fit in? So in the end, we ended up including my role as what we called a soft link. And instead of it having a hard line, it was a dotted line coming across. So my role, you know, as an example, for quality assurance, could actually sit to the side. The CEO comes up, our link down goes longer, and it could have a little dotted link coming across and connecting into our framework that we put together. The purpose of doing the framework is just to make it easier for you to present. Are we going to be marking you on whether we think your framework is right or is it wrong? You will all interpret this in different ways. And I have worked for organisations where we could not agree. We ended up brainstorming. I think one organisation, I think we did it something like 6 times before we got something that we all went, okay, we can live with this, right? So I don't want you spending a huge amount of time on it. So the big thing is making sure that you've put all your departments and you've listed them in here. So what will happen, and I'll just do this really quite briefly. What will happen is when you're doing your presentation, you've only got 5 minutes. So one of the things that I've suggested is breaking down the time. I've lost my notes, sorry. Breaking down the timelines so that you've got a bit of an idea how long you should spend on each of the sections. Okay, so when you're doing your presentation on this, so if we were to look at, as part of the leadership team, you're looking at developing an operational strategy. With your case study analysis, you're going to be thinking about what are the different roles. There's assumptions that you're going to make. There's perceptions that you will have. That's fine, right? You need to describe your role and identify 3 KPIs. So that means you're going to spend more time on that, not as much on the others. So when we think about what are the roles, the easiest way to potentially explain them would be, so I'm going to be double handling papers here to do this, would be along the lines of, so let's say this one here, like I'm just going to do this really randomly and I won't do all of them, right? So we might sort of say, you know, the main role of the organisation is the CEO, who is, and we would name the CEO. Under the CEO, we have a structure where there's 5 different departments. Now, in these departments, the first one we've got is here we've got compliance assurance department. Underneath the compliance assurance department, we've actually got contracts and administration, because both of those have got a strong tie to the legal team. And the compliance department is going to do audits, manage the processes and the systems, do audits on site when it comes to the different areas that we're working with. So you've got to have a really good understanding, you know, script yourself out so that you've got a good understanding of that. But you can describe each one based on this. The tricky thing is we've got 1,500 employees. You need to think about how many people are in each of those departments. That's the hardest part, trying to work out roughly how many people are in each one. And I would suggest on this map that you include that information. It's important because the HR and culture team, it's not going to be massive. It might only be 20 or 30 people. The finance team might be 20 or 30 people. However, your installation technicians, they might have 50 different companies that they're working across. So there might be 400 people in that team. So you actually need to think about what each of the departments does and roughly how many people would be needed to do that job. Have we got any questions with this, and has that helped make it a little bit clearer for you of what we mean when we talk about mapping out the organisation? Any questions, pop them in the chat for me. Now, remember, you can also discuss this with your class facilitator. Okay, so I would suggest if you're going to do that, put your map together and then reach out to your class facilitator and ask them, does this look like a good way to structure the organisation for my presentation? Having something visual will make it a lot easier for you to present within the time limits that you need to think about. So the next thing that we do need to consider is you would have a slide. So after you've done like a little bit of an introduction, you might have done your overview of the analysis, you've presented your framework, the organizational structure, and given a brief description of all the roles, you would then have a bit of a think about what your own role would look like. The other things that you need to think about are the goals moving forward and new issues that you might need to address. The old issues are the ones that we looked at in the previous case study. We then need to think about how those old issues might influence what happens moving forward. So we'll explore that a little bit more. So what I've tried to do, there will be a copy of the slides that will go up to the portal when I give you the recording link. This is really giving you an opportunity of each dot point could be a slide. So it gives you a bit of an idea. So you would do your title page, so your title slide, but you would have an introduction. Now, your introduction may include elements of the analysis, right? Keep it short and sweet. You're not going to spend a lot of time on it. You will review and summarize Error Plug's organizational structure. Their structure only. Do not go anywhere near the incident. Do not go anywhere near the issues that happen to the other department. You're just looking at the structure. Think about whether the structure is efficient and effective, or do you think that potentially in the future there might be a need for a restructure? And this is the department numbers are the number of people that are working in each of the departments. So that's given you a clear guideline what to include in your department structure. So you've got a visual there and include those things. Then once you've matched the structure, you could potentially do another slide where you identify the roles on the map, but then you're going to have another slide that might talk about which role you take on board. That role you need to explain in a little bit more detail. Make sure that you've given a little bit of, we need to understand, you know what your role is. Now, you're going to make assumptions. There's going to be perceptions of what you might see. You might actually do a bit of research and find out what sort of things does a person doing this kind of role, what do they do? And that's fine. If you do that, make sure you reference, that you've supported this by researching such and such an organisation. And that can be easy. When you're discussing it, you would go, based on Boeing and the way they have structured their organisation, the key roles or responsibilities for this particular role include things such as, that's fine, okay? So you can do that. But you do also need to think about the KPIs that you in that role will need to address. So remember, when we have this roadshow happening, you're one person. The next person's going to talk about their role, their KPIs. The next person's going to talk about their role, their KPIs. So everybody will take on different roles based on their interests and their backgrounds, their interests moving forward. And based on those roles, you're going to come up with your own KPIs. So your KPIs are your key performance indicators. How are you measured? What are the things that we need to look at? We talked about measuring outcomes and measuring things that you do in this week's information from class this week. I would suggest, and this is where the challenge comes about, you need to think about this really carefully. Make sure that you've got notes and that you've got all your ideas written down. You would only spend about 2 minutes in total covering all this information. So make sure that you've thought about this and that you've gone, how do I make my use of time the most efficient it can be? You do not have time in this presentation to discuss anything that's not needed. You need to make sure you stay really, really focused. So I've tried to remove all the complex elements and bring it down to, this is really simple. Don't overthink it. Just do these things and you'll be fine. Okay, so about 2 minutes in total for that part. Where do we go to after we've done that? So the new issues you're dealing with, I want you to think about some of the challenges that might happen. I'm running the quality assurance department, and all of a sudden I've got the board of directors telling me we need to improve our ethical practice, our organisational culture, What else did they say they wanted us to improve? Continuous quality management. That's what my job is. That's what I do. What are you telling me I need to improve it? Right? These are the new issues. Different departments are not going to be happy that this is what's going on. So we need to think about the challenges that might exist, because each department is going to see what is coming from the top down differently. And some of them are going to take offence to these things. Next week, we will be looking at managing change. So if you have up to this point done in your background research and the information you put together and your organisational structure, if you have that all done and ready, think about some of the things that might be issues. And then next week, when we talk about managing change, you'll have the opportunity to explore them a lot more in class as we go through the content. So if you've thought about this before class, it's going to help you deal with, ask questions and make the connections to the case study a little bit more. Now, at the beginning, I identified that you're looking at information from weeks 8 to 12. Week 8, we talked about motivation. If you've got a group of people that already think that they're doing what they need to do really, really well, and this incident has nothing to do with them, how dare you brand us with the same dirty stone, right? You're going to have to think about, how am I going to motivate them? Can anyone remember what week we covered motivation? Don't you just love it when I ask you a question and it's sort of like, oh my God, how long ago was that? Right? If we go to our little trusty subject outline, motivation was in week 9, right? In week 8, we had groups and teams in the organisation. So this is where this information will start to help you think about, how are those groups and teams going to respond? How can we think about motivating people? What is it that we might need to do? Yes, James, there could be internal and external pointers of motivation that we could take into account. So that's a really good, valid point. So these are the things that you could potentially look at and think about. You will touch a little bit on organisational culture potentially, but I want you to make sure that when you're looking at your issues, that you stay really focused and don't get sidelined into theories of organisational culture. Think about the culture of organisation as a quality organisation, as an ethical organisation, as an organisation that embraces diversity and communicates really well, right? So think along those sorts of lines more so. You have to be able to make the connections between the different departments. So we've got to think about the different departments and how they're all going to respond and react to this change that is being asked to be put forward. So in your role as the department head for your department, you need to come up with a list of things that potentially could cause challenges. Explain why they might cause challenges within your department when it comes to trying to implement these cultural changes that the organisation is wanting to do. And that ties in strongly with what we do next week, because it's not just managing change, but it's also managing cultural change as part of it. You will not have a lot of time to speak about everything that you find. So when you look at your list that you put together for your department, pick the one that you think is most important. Look at it and go, I think this is the one that's going to be really challenging. So you might identify it as a main issue, and then you might identify a couple of sub-issues, but really focus your discussion on your main issue. This part here, you probably spend about 1.5 minutes on. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of your timing there. You might have a couple of slides, but you're only looking at approximately 1.5 minutes in this area here to cover the elements that you need to think about. Then at the very, very end, we're going to come up with some recommendations. This is about strategies. So you want 2 sound recommendations. Now, I really want you to make sure that you actually go back and look at your feedback from assessment 2. I know with the ones that I looked at, whether it was moderation or whether it was marking, there were a lot of recommendations that were very broad. They were general, and they weren't really specific enough. So I want you to be in mind, a recommendation is not an assumption. It is something that you need to be able to word in a way so there's a reality. So if you're giving me a recommendation, I want to be able to listen to you discussing the recommendation and close my eyes and physically see how this is going to be implemented in the organisation. So it means that you've got to think a little bit more about it and explore it a little bit more real world. What does it actually look like? You've got to be able to explain it to your staff. You've got to be able to motivate them to embrace this recommendation that you're putting forward. So you need to make sure that they are really clear and that they're not, oh, we'll just do some training. No, what kind of training do you want to do? What do you want that training to achieve? Right? So make sure that it's really clear. Be specific about what you're doing. So the recommendations, that part there, you'll probably find that you'll spend 1.5 minutes. So you've got 2 sound recommendations, and I've given you a guideline on what the recommendations are, about 1.5 minutes on that. The rest of your marks is coming from presentation quality, and it's coming from your referencing and the flow of your presentation. So make sure you've practiced, make sure that you've got your ideas really well constructed and pulled together nicely. Now, one of the things I talked about in class today was my youngest son used to be involved in the school musicals when he was at school. His godfather is actually a director of some of our community theatres, and he directs a lot of plays and musicals as well. And when Darren was about 11 or 12, he was Oliver in Oliver Twist, very, very nervous going on stage in front of, and it was at, we're in Queensland, we've got the Ipswich Little Theatre. So this is one of the major theatres in our local community. So it's a decent sized theatre. It has different levels of staging. So it's not like a big city one, but it's got big different levels of seating so that it seats quite a number of people. So he was a little bit nervous about doing that. And one of the things that his godfather said to him was, go out there and have fun. Enjoy what you're doing. If you enjoy being Oliver, the audience is going to love you. So I'm going to tell you the same thing. When it comes to the presentation quality, because part of that is your charisma, the fact that you're trying to get us to trust you, you're trying to persuade the audience to believe in what you're saying, that you've got the knowledge and the ability to carry this through. I want you to make sure that you enjoy what you do. And if you're enjoying what you're doing with the presentation, embrace it. Really embrace the role. You are that leader. Present yourself as that leader. You would use your name. I am so-and-so and I am, so like in my case, I'm Kerry Butler and I am the manager for the quality compliance department of Aeroplug, right? I've put myself into that role and really embrace it. So really make sure that that's what you do. When you finish your presentation, it's sort of like, okay, that I'm just Kerry, MBA 401 lecturer, rather than, you know, manager of this particular. So it means that you can sort of put one hat on, take it off type of thing. But just really remember, you enjoy it, we'll enjoy it. And it gives us that opportunity of really seeing some good quality and for you to enjoy this as a task. See it as a real task because this is something that as a leader, and I could tell you now, even when I was in low-level supervisionary type of roles, the amount of times, especially if I was working on a team and we came up with a concept or an idea or we wanted to put an intervention into place, we would actually have to do a bit of a pitch to the board. And the amount of times, like I'd put stuff together and they'd turn around and go, hey, this looks really good. We want you to present it to the board. So this is something, this is a skill that potentially you could be using on a number of situations, in a number of environments, in a number of workplaces. So it is something that's helping you develop real life skills as part of the process. Okay, any questions at all? So this is your big chance to ask me, is there anything that I've not explained clearly enough for you that you want me to go back over? Just remember to definitely consult with your class facilitators. And when I say consult, put your ideas together, have them written, print them off, show them to them and sort of say, am I on the right track? Am I looking at the right things here when I'm putting this together? Okay, that way they can give you really specific feedback on whether you're heading in the right direction or not. So any questions at all? Okay, well, at the moment, what I will do is I will stop the recording.